everyone to look to the center. If you see empty chairs, if you could scoot in so our latecomers could have a chance to sit. We are a sold out house this evening, which is exciting to see. But yes, towards the middle would be wonderful. But before we hear from these brilliant speakers, I have a few notes for you. First, we request that you keep your mobile phones on silent during the event. If you haven't yet picked up your pre-ordered book, we have them back there at the registers, and more importantly, we have more copies for sale, so me and my colleague would be more than happy to help you out. Also, there will be a live stream this evening, so unless you want to be on the internet, please do not step in front of the iPad, which will be in this corner. And at the end of the event, we will have the signing. The signing will happen at this front table, and we will form a line towards these beautiful candles, and it'll go into the store in that direction. Yes, our first translator this evening is Yaëlle Azagury. She is a writer, literary scholar, and critic. She was a lecturer in French and Francophone Studies at Barnard College, a lecturer in discipline in the English and Comparative Literature Department at Columbia University, and she has contributed essays and scholarly articles for Women Writing Africa, Rethinking Jewish Culture and Society in North Africa and the Middle East, among other scholarly volumes. She is a native of Morocco, and thank you so much for being here this evening. Our other translator is Frances Malino. She is the Sophia Moses Robinson Professor of Jewish Studies and History Emerita at Wellesley College. She is the author of Sephardic Jews of Bordeaux, Assimilation and Emancipation in Revolutionary and Napoleonic France, a Jew in the French Revolution, the life of Zelkin Horowitz, and the co-editor of essays in modern Jewish history, a tribute to Ben Helfern, The Jews in Modern France, Profiles in Diversity, Jews in a Changing Europe, and Voices of Diaspora, Jewish Women Writing in New Europe. Her current project is titled Teaching Freedom, Jewish Sisters in Muslim Lands. In 2012, she was named Chaffer dans le del Palmes Académies, I'm sorry about my French, by the French Ministry of Education. So thank you for being here as well. This is the first English translation of a beautiful work titled Mazaltob by Blanche Bendehem. Bendehen's newest and moving novel is a masterly exploration of the language, religion, and customs constraining North African Jewish women on the cusp of emancipation and decolonization. The work was awarded by a prize by the Académie Française in 1930, and in this edition, our brilliant translators have added a historical introduction, a literary analysis, and annotations to elucidate historical and cultural terms for readers, supplementing the author's original notes. So I know y'all are just as eager as me to hear from these brilliant writers, so please help us welcome them to the story.
Thank you very much. I wonder if I could stand. Can I stand instead of sit? Yeah, that might be easier. And then I can get the microphone. Is that working? Yeah. Yeah, I'm short-waisted and I disappear when I sit down, so it wasn't going to work. I want to thank you all for coming, a lot of my friends and my building co-dwellers. And I also want to thank the Brookline Booksmith for hosting us. More than 10 years ago, probably more like 18 years ago, I discovered a little book in the archives of the Alliance Israélite Universelle in Paris, and its title was Mazaltob, which sort of tempted me to open its pages. And I skimmed through it, and I saw that it took place in Tétouan, a town in northern Morocco nestled against the Rif Mountains that I happen to know a great deal about. So I took the novel out, which in those days you could, and I photocopied it, brought the novel back, and took the photocopy home with me. Fast forward 15 years later, and it's COVID, and I have retired, so I don't have my office anymore. I just have a study in the library where all my research is, and we were told that because of COVID, those who were not teaching could not enter the campus. So I was finished with the research I was doing for we didn't know how long. But I remembered I had Mazaltob in my closet. And so I returned to the novel, and I read it carefully. And as I read it, I realized I needed a partner. I could put the novel in historical context. I could put the author in historical context, but I'm not a literary scholar, and it needed a literary context as well. Now, in all my years of teaching, I would emphasize to my students serendipity plays a very important role. If you don't understand serendipity, you're not going to understand why certain things happened historically. But even serendipity wouldn't have prepared me for finding the perfect partner in Yaëlle Azagury. Who could imagine, think of it, it defies statistical odds. Who could imagine I would find someone who owned a copy of Mazaltob, I did not, who was working on 4 North African Jewish women writers, including Blanche Ben-Dahan, the author of Mazaltob, who had herself grown up in Tangier in northern Morocco, and who lived in Stamford, Connecticut. I mean, does that not defy statistical odds? And the sine qua non of putting us together is sitting right here, Matilda Bruckner, so a big thank you to you. Without you, we wouldn't be here this evening. And together, so I called Yaëlle, and together we translated the novel. I wrote an introduction situating it historically. Yaëlle has a wonderful essay at the end of the book, putting the novel in literary perspective. And thanks to Sylvia Fuchs-Fried and Brandeis University Press for their support, after 4 years, it was ready for publication. I have to say also that Yaëlle and I didn't see each other for over the first year of our working together. We never used Zoom. Because of COVID, we didn't get together, and we just used the telephone. And we would call each other pretty much every day, put the telephones down on our desk and work. And so I was so shocked when I first met Yaëlle, because in my mind's eye, I knew what she looked like, and that's not at all what she looked like. So this evening, what we're going to do is I'm going to give you a brief introduction to Mazaltob, its author, and historical context, but very brief introduction. And then I want to read a few brief passages which introduce some of the more important characters in the novel. So you'll get a sense of Ben-Dahan's style, of the incredible irony she uses, and you'll get a sense of who's who in the novel. And then Yaëlle will take over and share some thoughts on the literary context of the novel and read some excerpts as well. So we're going to speak relatively briefly, open it up for questions, and then if we run out of questions and we haven't run out of time, we have more to say. So trust me, we'll have more to say. So who was Blanche Ben-Dahan? She was well known in her lifetime, but has remained an elusive figure. Couldn't make out what that was. Okay. Well known in her lifetime, but has remained an elusive figure shrouded in mystery. And the few details that we were able to find that people had mentioned her, they were wrong. Her birthday was wrong, all sorts of things were wrong. So fortunately, we were able to clear up a number of biographical details. Because of COVID, however, we didn't do as much as we would have liked. One of the things would have been to go to Nice, actually. In any event, Ben-Dahan was born in 1893 in Oran, which is a port city in northwest Algeria. And this city in Algeria had a large community of Jews and a very important community of Jews from Tétouan, from the town of northern Morocco. She had a Catholic birth mother who was 19 years old and who died in childbirth. And 3 months after, she was adopted by Hayo Alfred Ben Oliel, no doubt the biological father of Blanche Ben-Dahan. And her early years were spent with her father in France, and they lived in various towns. And in Marseille, where they lived for a while and was always dear to her heart, he married a woman, Marie Hortense Gilou, to whom Blanche Ben-Dahan says in her dedication, "It is to this Catholic stepmother who guided my childhood so tenderly that I chose to dedicate my Jewish novel." And it may well be that this was also one of her teachers in a French school, but it also became she also became her stepmother. Her early years were spent, as I said, in France, and she returned to Oran at the age of 14. By then, her father had divorced Marie-Hortense, as you knew, and married, Blanche married at the age of 26 a young man named Yaëlle Ben-Dahan, who was a colonial goods merchant. And by then, by the age of 26, she was already known for articles and for a book of poetry. But in the next few years, she became known internationally as a professor at the Sorbonne, as a journalist. She wrote essays, and as an absolutely brilliant poet, winning awards and accolades from major poets of the time. She remained in, Blanche Ben-Dahan remained in Oran until 1962, when just about all the Jews of Algeria left. Algeria had become independent. The Jews of Algeria had been made French citizens in 1870 by a Crémieux decree, and so they were really not welcome once Algeria had its independence. So she left for France in 1962 and settled in Nice. And she wrote one final book, which is a book of essays, very poignant, titled Under the Suns That No Longer Shine. So that is Blanche Ben-Dahan's life in a nutshell. She died in 1975 at the age of 82 and was buried in Nice. When she wrote Mazaltob, Blanche Ben-Dahan was 37 years old. It was published in 1930 and republished in Oran, Algeria, but not until the late 1950s, and also in 2 Spanish editions, but never in English. In 1931, as you heard, the Académie Française awarded Mazaltob one of its annual prizes. She was the only Jewish laureate among 53, one of the few women, and she stood alone in writing on a Jewish topic. So let me tell you just a couple sentences about what Mazaltob is all about, and then I can read to you some passages. And I will have a little water. Mazaltob is set in turn of the 20th century Tetuan. And at the time, in 1900 Tetuan, there were a little over 5,000 Jews living there, and about 35, the total population was about 35,000. And what was unique about Tetuan is that both Muslims and Jews shared an Andalusian culture. They shared that culture in their food, they shared that culture in their music, they shared that culture even in their marriage customs. And we'll see, I don't know if you're going to read a little bit of it, so which is also very, wedding, which is very much influenced by Andalusian culture. There were virtually no Christians living in Tetuan. And the reason why they shared this Andalusian culture is that both the Jews and the Muslims had been expelled from Spain at the end of the 15th century. And they longed to return and kept their keys, theoretically anyway, I couldn't prove it, nearby of their homes in Andalusia. Mazaltob is a tale, as I said, that takes place in Tetuan, and it's of a young girl for whom liberation from a cherished but suffocating world becomes a question of life or death. With 9 children in their family and falling on hard times, Mazaltob's parents decided it was quite appropriate to betroth their 16-year-old daughter to Jose Halfan, who was a Tetuani Jew aged 40, who had returned to Tetuan to get a nice, lovely young bride. And Halfan had been spending his time in Buenos Aires, Argentina, enjoying a very hedonistic lifestyle. Mazaltob, meanwhile, at 16, had completed her studies at an Alliance Israelite Universelle school, and Ben-Dahan tells us with typical irony, had a nostalgia for France, a country she would never know. She also had a soulmate, Jean, the adopted son of the Ashkenazi doctor in town, in Tetuan. And it's very significant, I think, that Jean, like the author, Blanche Ben-Dahan, had a Jewish parent and a Catholic parent. and that the author, Blanche Bendahan, had as a middle name, Jean. There are multiple themes running through the novel, and I'll mention just a few of them. Romanticism, anti-Semitism, colonialism, and the Haskalah, which is Jewish enlightenment. Also, there's a plea for religious pluralism, a strong feminist commentary, and the beauty of time-honored Sephardi tradition. There's finally an erotically charged atmosphere. But yet another layer in all this is that the novel is also autobiographical, somewhat like Albert Memmi's Pillar of Salt, if any of you have read that work. And in the autobiographical novel, as we read it, Bendahan navigates the continuities and ruptures of her own multifaceted and intricately textured life. So it's layer upon layer, even though it's a little novel. So let me give you a sense of this by reading to you a few sections so that I can introduce you to some of the characters, and you can really see the irony of Bendahan, that she takes you just so far and then undercuts exactly what she's saying. And you'll also see her strong feminist commentary coming out. So the first quote is describing Uncle Solomon, whom it's quite clear to me, and has become clearer since the since the book has appeared, because I reread Mazaltob, it becomes even clearer that Uncle Solomon is actually modeled on Blanche Bendahan's father. And I'll share with you what I just found recently in rereading Mazaltob, which I had not, it had gone right by me when I first read it, that this uncle is speaking. In Tetuan, no one has a child out of wedlock. Who would impregnate an unmarried girl? Well, he did. So she was both loving her father in this novel, but also letting him know what she thought about what he had done. In any event, this is a different selection from the novel about Uncle Solomon. Uncle Solomon is well-traveled. He appeared by turn in the census of London, Berlin, Paris, Florence, and New York. Like many of his brethren, he decided with age to come back home. For isn't it terrible to die far from the land of our forebears? He speaks of the wretched winters of the northern countries, their gray rivers and their grand bridges. Under the somber arches shelter shivering men, women, and sometimes children, pangs of hunger contracting their empty stomach. O Mazaltob, O delicate face, O queen, remember that all Jews are brothers, and we have no right, do you hear, no right at all, to forget those amongst us in need. This is just a little snippet of a couple of sentences, but the irony is clear. It is the eve of Shabbat, or Noche Shabbat. At the end of the service, it is customary to visit the elderly. Much like ancient Rome, Tetuan, ever behind the times, has great respect for its elders. Very. And now the description of Jose Halfan. Thanks to his wealth, he's known plenty of actresses. He's also known plenty of sophisticated women, for he is proud to have sown his wild oats in Buenos Aires. But as he nears 40 now, he knows it is time to leave the dance floor. On the large transatlantic vessels carrying the newlyweds to the shores of Christopher Columbus, the Goyim look at them, and this is what they say to themselves: there goes father and daughter. Never has one of these youths been reported to rebel against such a state of affairs. Everyone is so accustomed to these unions, for is there anything to be done against heat, cold, illness, old age, or death? And now we come to Jean, her soulmate, Mazaltob's soulmate, and he's writing a letter to his uncle who adopted him because he had lost his parents in the pogrom. Dear father, I have heard of Mazaltob's wedding. I have never felt so sad. Poor little friend of my childhood, so sweet, so understanding, and so beautiful. Poor little friend of my childhood, whose auspicious name belied her destiny. Her youth beckoned to the youth of another. Her charm invited only love. My poor, poor Mazaltob, who discovered between the lines of a book, a world beyond her native country, where women in beauty reign as queens. May God help her to forget a world she merely glimpsed. My poor, poor Mazaltob, already married and have handed over, and to whom? This next is a description of the burial of Mazaltob's mother, but it's also a very strong feminist critique on the part of Bendahan. The epitaphs on the graves, both in Spanish and Hebrew, all look the same: name, date of death, and a few words of praise on the deceased life. Like elsewhere, it is enough in Tetuan to die to be regarded as virtuous. Nevertheless, Mazaltob's mother, like countless women of other races, deserves the following inscription on her grave. So this is Bendahan's ideal inscription. She spent her entire childhood working, helping her mother to raise her enormous family. Married off at a young age, she kept working, although she did it for herself. Between her 15th and her 38th year, she kneaded more than 10,000 kilos of bread. She prepared more than 8,000 lunches and dinners, spent 17,000 hours making preserves, and preparing traditional alcalde of fried meat kept in oil. Additionally, she devoted more than 17,000 hours to cleaning the house, and another 17 to sewing linens and clothing for the family. Up early, late to bed, she knew nothing of distractions, not even the most elementary walk. And throughout all those years, when she ceaselessly toiled and toiled, she sacrificed her youth and her beauty to that minotaur called home. May she now rest in peace. And this is Mazaltob, little descriptions of Mazaltob herself and what she's feeling. Why have I scorned happiness, wonders Mazaltob every so often. Who would have wept if I had listened to my heart and had become the wife of my childhood companion? My mother is dead. In my father's life, rife with the screams of my stepmother, there is little room for me. Preciada, that's her sister. Her children and her husband and her household all are a buffer between us. Uncle Solomon, my aunts, my cousins, they are old, alas. No one requires that vain sacrifice of me. And you, Jean, who hauls your moribund life across the ocean, Jean, will you ever forgive me my life? It's because of me his life is shattered, because of me, and Mazaltob curses herself. Why did she banish Jean? Why did she fight her desire to see him again? What fallacious grasp of the word duty gave her the right to make someone suffer? Nevertheless, you did the right thing, approves the sectarian god of her childhood. Jean does not believe in me. No, you have sinned, counters the other god, the god of logic, who loves all his children equally, be they Christian, Jewish, or simply deistic, that god who loves even the atheist. Mazaltob descends into her soul's depths and plumbs them ceaselessly, her thoughts groping, reaching out for each argument as to jagged edges of a rock. Suddenly, the beautiful Jewish girl lifts up her head as though Eureka had been whispered into her ears. She knows. Now she knows that the one who rebelled against love is the other Mazaltob, the woman from Tetuan, the woman held captive by the Gudaria, not physically, but spiritually. I want to conclude this reading with just one more, which is a warning, and I really think it speaks to our times. I think a lot in this novel speaks to our times, but this very pointedly. There is a young woman, Leah, who is Mazaltob's Ashkenazi friend, and this is Leah, who is speaking to Mazaltob. We often fabricate our views and our prejudices en masse. We are like captains who maneuver their boats the same way, regardless of the weather. As for all that belongs to the past, it is little different, for when we say this is foolish, perhaps it is we who judge foolishly. So that's a little taste of Mazaltob, and now we'll turn to Yaëlle, who will give you a very different perspective on Mazaltob as a literature.
Not a different perspective.
Another perspective.
Yeah, another perspective. a little more focused on the texts and textual analysis, or finely grained textual readings. And for that, I'm going to, if you have the book, I chose a passage which I think is really very emblematic of the entire book and of the entire of her project, of Bendahan's project, and what she's trying to do here. And it's in fact the wedding ceremony of Mazaltob, who's getting married to this callous character named Jose Halfon, that Fran mentioned. And the passage, the wedding ceremony among Moroccan Jews is called Berberiska, Noche de Berberiska in Spanish. And in fact, it's a little bit of a trope, both in literature of the time and later on, as I will explain, but also you can find it even in paintings by the French Orientalist painter Eugène de la Croix in the 19th century. You see beautiful paintings, if you know de la Croix well, you see beautiful paintings of women attired and in this elaborate wedding dress that is so characteristic of Moroccan Jews. In fact, I myself got married in the Berberiska dress in Morocco to my American husband. So you can, and I wrote about it, so you can, if you're interested, you can see how it's used as a trope. But here we go. If you have the book, it's on page, can you hear me okay? I know so if you have the book, and please get it, it's on page 32. And it's, as I said, she's really married against, Mazaltob is married against her will. So it's a very important moment. On the path of the wedding procession, and it's on top of the page 32, all the porches have been whitewashed a few days ago. Sumptuously dressed in the local Berberiska costume, a solemn crown called sfifa around her head, rouge on her cheeks and henna on her nails, she keeps her eyes closed all the way so that her husband is the first man she will see upon arrival. Family and friends have preceded her. The piyut, Yaëlle, rises to the mostly darkened sky. The entire neighborhood is watching at their windows and doorsteps. You, the flower of all flowers has left her home. With the Nahora, a huge lantern illuminating its path, the procession courses through the tiny streets of the Juderia. You. The father bestows on the most prominent man the honor of carefully guiding the blind steps of his daughter. And Mazaltob, with eyes shut, is led to her destiny. So why is this an important passage and description? Is because it illustrates and it exemplifies the duality of and multivocality of the text and the duality of narrative voices throughout the text. How so? Well, one perspective when you read this text, this passage, is that it is an outsider's vision of a wedding ceremony. So in many ways, it's an ethnographic description. Ethnographic means that it's analyzed from, as I said, outside. And for that, Bendahan is very much using the tools that the new science of ethnography, very much so, Bendahan is very much aware of that. She uses that to explain and make known to everyone, to a lay readership, what is the Berberiska. On the other hand, what's most interesting is that it's also description that comes from the inside. Ben Dahan is personally involved in it. So let me just give you an example. If I go back to this, the piyut Yaëlle trend rises to the mostly darkened sky. The entire neighborhood is watching at their doorsteps, at their windows and doorsteps. What's interesting here is that you have basically it's as if we have we're watching it, we're watching a kind of spectacle. And when you say spectacle, oftentimes you're cut from it, you're distant. But at the same time, you have this emotion arising from the voice of the narrator who speaks in, he says all of a sudden, as an eruption in the text, you, the flower of all flowers, has left her home. And you wonder, who's speaking here? It's no longer a distant narrator, it's somebody who's personally involved in the text. And this is what is so intriguing, is that Ben Dahan is able to navigate two different levels of the narrative and two different levels of description. And that she is scientifically, objectively describing a spectacle, but also at the same time participating in it. And this ends up destabilizing the narrative voices in the text and undermining it, which is a good thing, at least for us modern readers. And again, when you have so I said the flower of all flowers and you, and then at the end ending, and Mazaltob with eyes shut is led to her destiny, we revert once again to the objectifying. She's like an automaton, like a robot kind of, being directed and seen from outside. So what does this mean, and where does this come from? This double or multiplicity of voices? Well, it is an Orientalist novel in many ways. And what do we mean by Orientalist novel? Different levels. One of them is the traditional definition of what Orientalist and Orientalism used to be, up until, throughout the 19th century, end of 19th century, until well into the 20th century. And an Orientalist was somebody who was knowledgeable and was an expert, be him or her an anthropologist, a linguist, a philologist, an ethnographer on the Orient. So in that sense, she is she's an expert. Ben Dahan is an Orientalist. And that definition, up to the early 20th century, always carried a positive connotation. Now, for us, nowadays, that has changed since Edward Said wrote a book about Orientalism. And what does he say really in that book? He says that whatever was written on the Orient created a binary between East and West. And of course, West looking down upon the East created a hierarchy between the Westerner who's analyzing the culture and the Easterner or Oriental who's being analyzed. So Ben Dahan also, interestingly, has, as I just showed, that perspective. And once again, she has the knowledge about what she's talking about. She knows what she has the science, should I say, and she also has this more negative understanding of it. This is troublesome, and one could stop at that, but of course there's a third layer, and the third layer is what follows. sort of hinted at already, is that she is herself born into this culture. And so she speaks from within. And that gives her an authority as somebody who knows it and perceives it and understands it in the most intimate ways. And the fourth, and I'll end up with just one fourth level, just so I won't bore you too much. There is, one could say, a final dimension. Yeah, I'm sorry. And to finish on the third thread that I was saying, that she's this insider, and that really puts her in the position of a mediator, a cultural intermediary. And that has been traditional, or in Middle Eastern studies, the understanding of what Sephardic Jews were about. They were mediators, intermediaries, cultural intermediaries between cultures. So she's, in that sense, very much, in that role. And I would say that if we wanted, since I'm a literary scholar, once again, I like to take it to a last level, is what does she do with all of this? And I think the final dimension is that she takes the ethnographic, and with it, she blends it with her understanding of what literature should be. What is the literature of the time? What is going on? It's an exciting moment in the literature. Modernism is at its height, one should say, at that 1920s, 1930s. And she blends that understanding of the ethnographic with all her influences that she has. It could be her knowledge of French literature. She mentions, and she knows very well, the Romantic literature of the time. It could be the traditional ballads of the Sephardi Jew. There's mention and description and quoting of these ballads. There's popular folk tales of Moroccan and Muslims that are also added to the mix. So it creates a very interesting and multi-layered text. And it's what we like to call in literary studies hybridity. And hybridity does that, mixes multiple influences, mixes high and low registers, which she does very much, mixes languages. There's French, Spanish, Judeo-Spanish, Hebrew, and Arabic throughout the text. And so all of that, and multiple layers, and as Fran was showing, levels of reading with irony and more straightforward. So I think that in the end, the text ends up being much more than the sum of its parts. And it creates like a very complex tapestry and of a very complex identity, but also a narrative that is very complex, that is very modernist, I would say, that takes from Jewish ethnographic or traditions, that makes this Jewish tradition known, and we have to remember that this is, Philip Roth wasn't born there, so this understanding of what Philip Roth and Jewish identity was not at all the moment for that. Nobody knew anything about Jewish identity, and the 1920s were in fact completely, especially in France and in other Western countries, making that identity known, and Blanche does that. But at the same time, she's also using literary tools at her disposal to create a more than simply an ethnographic account. And what I would call, and what I argue, is a very modernist narrative. So to end this, I think the effect is at times very whimsical, playful, humorous, and often satirical. One voice always undercutting another voice, and that contributes to what I suggested was this elusiveness of the modern narrative. We're all contemporary readers. We like meaning is not fixed anymore since, I would say the beginning of the 20th century. And I think the specificity and the beauty and the peculiarity of this novel is that it really is in sync with this moment in time, a very modern moment in time where there's, I would say, a narrative of loss already and of exile. This is what undercutting, one thread undercutting the other ends up being. So again, I think that's very contemporary, and that in fact, this idea of loss, exile, and of an exilic personality is something that we will find from that moment up until now, and the post-colonial novel that we all, or that we know about, and that we read. So this is what makes it so modern, and that's
I guess we're ready for any questions that anyone has for either Yaëlle or me, or both of us. Yaëlle.
I actually have 3 questions.
But there are only 2 of us.
So one is, I wanted to know more about, was this her only Jewish book, or was there other writing also? Did she engage with her Jewishness, or?
So that's a very good question.
Yeah.
Actually, she didn't.
Well, but yeah, she did in her essays. She had very, she had.
Couldn't hear the question.
Oh, the question is Mazaltob the only work of Blanche Bendahan's that touches on things Jewish, on Jewish culture, Jewish history, Jewish anything? And the answer is no. It's the only fiction that does, that we know about. But she wrote very serious, really long articles in publications, often of the Alliance Israélite Universelle, which talk about Sephardi Jewish history, which talk about the culture of the Jews of Spain. She was in love with the culture of Spain, and she was such a proud Sephardi Jew. And the Tetuani Jews were definitely Sephardi Jews. They asserted it over and over again. And so there were at least 2 or 3 long articles that she wrote. She was also a journalist, and she had short articles. She was interviewed by El Maleh, who was a Sephardi anthropologist at the time, a lengthy article in Al Machbarot in Hebrew, talking about her influence in bringing to light Sephardi Jewish history. So she was very definitely, and the book that I found in the Alliance was inscribed to the Alliance with, in great dedication. So she was very proud as a Jewish Sephardi woman, very much so.
At the same time, what is very striking, and it's almost like a disconnect. Her book of poems, which is called Poèmes en short, like poems written in shorts, but also in shorts being short poems. So this tells you, her multiple levels of understanding. So that book, which is wonderful, with lots, never translated, so by all means, that's a project. And in that, there's 0 mention of anything Jewish or Sephardic, as if it had been written by a different person, which is very fascinating and goes into what we were saying of her multiple levels of understanding.
Can I ask the other?
Yeah, sure.
All right, so the other 2 questions, one is about how was the book received? And then the other, because it's sitting there in front of us, the cover.
Yeah. I'll do the receipt, you can do the cover. So the book was lauded in France, praised by journals on the left and journals on the right. It was very well received in France. What I did read but have no proof for, because we've not been to Algeria and we haven't looked at Algerian sources, was that the Jews of Algeria weren't so happy about it. But that may be, an understandable reaction. But it was very well received, certainly by non-Jews, and I think that was her intent, to address a non-Jewish audience and a French audience.
There's in fact another novel, I talk about it a little bit in my essay, that precedes it. It's called Rabbin by a male writer called Sadia Levi. And that was horribly received because he excoriates traditional Jews of his community. So on the cover, this is a French painter named Charles Landel, and this specific painting is at the Museum of Fine Arts in Reims, in France.
And
it's
it
very-
is
oh,
a Jewish woman.
It is, exactly. It's Jewish woman from Tangier, in fact.
Yeah.
So we're off by one town, but
The
not that
the
far.
funny thing is, some people have come to me and said, is that actually a painting of Mazaltob? And I said, how could it be? She's fictional.
Well, if you're Proustian, that could be true.
But in our mind, this is Mazaltob. This is what she
Do you know
looks like.
what Blanche looked like? Or no?
Yes, I do know what Blanche looks like, because in the Machbarot, in the interview with her in Hebrew, there's it's hard to see because it's black and white and it was an old newspaper, but she's very petite, very pretty and blonde. Very much like she describes Jean in the novel, who is fair, delicate, and a poet. And you can get that I feel very strongly that Jean is very much Blanche Bentham in the novel.
I know.
I do feel that.
I know you do.
I absolutely feel it very strongly.
That's why we compliment each other. Yeah.
Yes, but I did find
Yeah,
that Blanche's
absolutely.
middle name was Jean.
That's
I mean,
true.
that really,
That's true.
that tied it up. But I was already there before I found out her middle name was Jean.
She's the ninth friend.
Oh,
Oh, sorry. Have you been able to hear what I've been saying? Yeah, okay. I can't sing very well, but I can project.
yes.
Did Blanche Bentham ever have any children?
Big mystery. We didn't find any record of it. We don't think so.
Also, her husband was significant.
She had children.
Also, her husband was significantly older than she. So maybe that he had children from a previous marriage. We don't know.
We don't
that.
know, yeah.
Yeah, there's a lot we don't know. If it hadn't been for COVID, we would have gone to Nice, hoping that maybe there was records there. That was her last place when she died in Nice and was buried in Nice. We would have gone to the cemetery, but that was out of the question.
But we did some pretty
But we did a lot of-
deep digging in
Yeah.
the Geneanet on the internet, which is very accurate and gives you all sorts of genealogical connections.
Genealogical.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Genealogical connections. And couldn't find anything as to her children. We found all her parentage, but no children. So that we concluded there weren't any.
Do you have any idea why it was so popular in France and not in other countries? What is special?
Repeat the question.
So the lady's asking, why was it so popular in France and not in other countries? Well, very clearly, we think that she was engaging with the Christian readership, and she's writing for a Christian readership, most certainly. In fact, even there are dialogues in the text that are meant to. There's a character named Charles Balder, who's a friend of Jean, and he's Christian, and there's very very deep discussion on Christianity, the similarities between Christianity and Judaism. So clearly, the 1920s, as I was trying to suggest, is a time of rediscovery of Jewish identity in France. And there's a lot of Jewish ethnographic accounts by Jews and non-Jews. And obviously there's a very big interest at that moment. Of course, it turns out in the 30s it becomes something much less palatable, but 20s there was genuine desire to reach out to the other.
She was also involved in Algeria in a multi-faith organization. She was a real political activist. She was a member of international feminist organizations. She spoke at meetings of these organizations, so she herself was advocating this pluralism. I think it was deep inside her, this commitment to it.
What would you say is the feeling of the feeling
About the text? Or? I think
Say the question.
you're asking what was the reception among the Jewish community in Oran or in France, or in which, I mean, there's different reactions. I think Fran was mentioned that it wasn't so well received, because it is a bit of a criticism. I mean, it's a critical approach. Not only, actually, it functions on so many different levels. But and nowadays it's considered a classic of Sephardi literature, and everybody who reads it among, the Sephardim love it, and because it's such a moment in time, just when Jews are it's the beginning of emancipation and the encounter with modernity. So it. Well, I mean, I think.
Tell them what the question is.
Yeah, I mean, what is the? Yeah, I think the encounter with modern, it's just a dilemma. So I think you're asking about how does she encounter, or what is, what is the encounter with modernity in the text? It's really that Mazaltob is in love with this man and who's not Jewish or only partly Jewish, and she is. She wants to remain faithful, very loyal to her Jewish traditions and I think that dilemma is one that it's a very Jewish dilemma at the beginning and late 19th century, beginning of the 20th century, wherever
Also,
encounter.
She had gone to an Alliance Israeli Universal school, and Bendahan tells us that Mazaltob had a nostalgia for a country she would never know, i.e. France. So it's that struggle, and how can you retain the traditions that you cherish and embrace a modern world, which might mean that some of those traditions will have to be eschewed. And it's a struggle and a dilemma which persisted, and persists.
And persists, exactly. I think Matilda.
Well, I was curious to know if the novel is available in French these days.
Very hard.
I've been trying to buy it now
Yeah.
because I just have my old tattered photocopy that I made eons ago. I've gone to Jewish book dealers, Yaëlle.
I've had like all my little radars, out there to find a copy for Fran, and it's really hard.
Well,
So
I just wonder now that you have translated it and sort of brought it back.
To life.
They'll
Yeah.
reissue it.
Yeah.
Yeah. What we would like also is it was published in Algeria. I would like to see what the version was that was published in Algeria. Is it the same as what we had, or did they change some things? We don't know.
And what language was that in?
Oh, French.
French. Yeah.
French. Yeah. Algeria was part of France during all these years.
Say it again. Yes, please. Go ahead.
So, there are these little digs within, and then, as you noted, Fran, those times there was mention from the international feminist, blah, blah, blah. But that was not a way that people, women spoke or thought at that time.
Yeah.
With a few exceptions. So
Yeah.
what's the deal?
Yeah.
Where's that coming from?
You
She
wanna-
was ahead of her time.
Yeah, well, I have another suspicion. Can I share my
Of
other?
course.
Yeah,
Question.
well, why not? I'm among friends.
What's the question?
What?
What's the question?
So where was, how did you phrase it? Z, how did you phrase?
How did she have so many insights and digs at, you know, the sort of
The male-female
male-fe-
relations
yes,
and things like
culture,
that.
yeah.
I think she was probably bisexual. I think that in making Jean, who is male, representing her, I think there was a lot of that in her. And this is just an intuitive sense in my reading it. And I don't know if we share that view or not, maybe you're less.
Yeah, I was less into that.
It doesn't
interpretation.
appear in my introduction.
I mean,
But I think it's
a
coming
possibility.
from, and when her first book of poems that she presented to the poet, remember? She didn't use her name, which would have given away that she was female. She only used her initials, and he felt that they were so strongly male that he presumed that the author was a man, remember?
Yeah.
So it's complicated, and we'll never know, but that's my intuitive sense in reading it. Judy?
So, did I understand correctly that her mother was not Jewish?
You understood correctly, though no one knew it, it's never been written about, nobody ever mentioned it, that her mother was an unmarried Catholic girl from Malaga, Spain.
So, but she was accepted as Jewish.
Well, the
in
question,
community?
good point, we don't know.
We don't
Yes,
know.
she was accepted as a Sephardi Jew, yes, and El Maleh referred to her as a Sephardi Jew. What we don't know is, was she converted? Don't know. Presume so when she was adopted, that she was. Certainly her identity was totally as a Jewish woman, and she was treated as such, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I think Jessica's telling us one more question.
There's a question in the back here.
Yeah, yeah.
Fran just answered my question to some extent, but I was going to ask, first of all, congratulations.
Thank you.
For what you say, it's a monumental work in that genre part of the Jewish movement.
We can't really hear you, sorry.
So, yeah, so I think Fran partly answered my question a moment ago, but I was going to congratulate you for what seems to be a monumental work of Sephardic literature. But my question is this, to what extent the plot of the book, you said it's autobiographical, to what extent the plot of the book coincides with her life, with the life of the writer?
Well, so there's a possible autobiographical interpretation, and Fran feels, I mean, I think she's right, she's reading it like that. I look, we have different levels of reading the text, but I think it's not the only interpretation, I would say.
Well, that's an example of, if indeed she identifies with the character of the book, in that she feels like she's being forced by some cultural norm to accept a lover, a mate, whom she finds unacceptable, that would be a way in which it's more literally autobiographical, I suppose that's what you're getting at, right, Fran?
I'm not sure I followed exactly what you said. I'm so sorry.
Just trying to understand if she identifies with,
Is she identified with Mazaltob?
yeah, in what way, to what extent it's autobiographical.
Yeah, I think she identified with both Jean and Mazaltob. Mazaltob could not leave Tetuan, or it was so hard. How could she dismiss this woman of Tetuan? Blanche Bendahan can't either. And at the same time, Jean can't have Tetuan, i.e. Mazaltob. And Blanche Bendahan couldn't have that old Tetuan, that Sephardi culture, really. So I think there's that too, as autobiographical. that made sense.
Yeah, yeah,